In my experience, a lot of people that, at least in the fashion industry, that are considering doing NFTs, they just hadn't thought about the energy consumption aspect yet. And especially from big brands, you would expect that this is something to be considered. Also, given that fashion has a massive carbon footprint globally. I've seen some numbers say that fashion is responsible for up to 10% of our total carbon emissions, which isn't weird because everyone's wearing clothes.
Hi, and welcome to the Financial Fox, investing and innovation ideas with a twist. I'm your host, Steffi B, and each week I bring you intriguing interviews and hard talks with entrepreneurs, market experts, and leaders in the crypto and financial space to discuss markets and innovation. Today is a bit of a remake, but is more like an in-depth remake. I have Alexander De Vries, founder of Digiconomist, an online publication exposing the unintended consequences of digital trends, and we talk about fashion and their impact on the environment. So, energy consumption of NFTs is not something that we shouldn't consider. Actually, NFTs on Ethereum can create a big carbon footprint, more than a physical item. So, what's happened if we are minting the NFT on a sidechain or a layer 2 as Polygon? Let's see. Although the solution seems really for an NFT to be minted on a proof of stake, such as Cardano. Alex is going to break down all the data, he's going to make comparison, and I thought there was a very interesting point to clarify, particularly for this fashion brand. They are just jumping on the bandwagon of NFT when they should do a little bit more research. And the fact that fashion is evolving in digital fashion, it also means they have to understand the technology, and perhaps they have to look to hire people they can gather those data to make sure that their mission, their principles is also in line to their operation. So I really hope that you're going to like this interview. Remember that I'm not a financial advisor. And if you're not subscribed to the Financial Fox YouTube channel and podcast, click the subscribe button now and if you have got any questions, send me a message on social media or send me an email at steffi@financialfox.news. I will come back to you and I see you next time. Hey Alex, how are you?
Doing very well. Hope the same for you.
Yes, all good. Listen, last time we discussed about the energy consumption of Bitcoin, Ethereum, basically layer 1 solution, and also this NFT craze that is really creating a big impact on the planet because it's got like big carbon footprint that people and companies they are jumping on this NFT bandwagon, they really don't realize. So what I want to do today, I want to kind of analyze exactly that. So if we have to compare the energy consumption of NFT on layer 1 to, for example, NFT on layer 2, so let's say a project that is using Polygon, right? And then the NFT on a proof of stake, which we stated last time could be the solution to minimize the carbon footprint.
Well, yes, absolutely. The thing is, the reason why we're having this discussion is because ultimately the big energy consumption is in these proof of work based systems. Hey, if you're building an NFT right now or issuing an NFT right now, you might do that on Ethereum, and Ethereum is currently running on proof of work. So if you do that, it will get a pretty substantial footprint simply because Ethereum is ultimately running on a proof of work based system. And that's where the pain always is when we're talking about these public blockchains. You have this massive network at the back end that's just generating a whole lot of computations every second of the day. They do that to make new blocks of transactions or whatever's going on this blockchain. They're trying to process it, but they have to make new blocks to do that, and the only way to make a block is to participate in what is in any proof of work based system a guess the number game. And if you guess correctly, you are allowed to create the next block for the blockchain, and you get a reward for that. So there is a big reason to do it, because you get paid to do it. And the more valuable Ethereum is, the more valuable, the more income you can generate from doing this, from generating new blocks. Now, obviously, all these computers are spending a whole lot of energy in this process, and that's why we see those really big numbers. We see that cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum can consume as much electrical energy as entire countries, but that's specifically for this, guess the number game in the back end.
So, Alex, right, let's start with some kind of example and maybe nail down to some kind of numbers, because they're always important to show, the reality, what is happening. So let's say last time you mentioned about a white dress, and you kind of tracked the footprint, the carbon footprint of that dress, and that dress was an NFT minted on Ethereum. Now, if I have a cotton t-shirt, right, like a physical t-shirt, can you make some comparison between a physical item and a digital item, and which one is consuming more energy?
Well, it really depends where you put your digital item, but let's start with the physical item, because a real t-shirt can have a carbon footprint of around 10 kilograms, depending on the material that's used. So it's also dependent on what kind of material you use to make the t-shirt, but it can be up to 10 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per t-shirt. So that's a pretty big amount by itself. But once you start thinking about NFTs, you will quickly realize that the carbon footprint of those can be a lot higher if they are being built on a proof of work based blockchain.
So you are basically saying that digital items can have a much like a worse impact on the environment than a physical one.
Yes, yeah. Well, you're not using the blockchain, obviously not. So, you suppose you're not involving the blockchain or Ethereum in any way. Well, because what happens is that if you, for example, want to have a digital dress, you send a picture of yourself to an artist that's making these digital products, and they will just Photoshop the digital dress on top of you, and then you're dressed for that picture. That doesn't have a massive carbon footprint. You need to have a computer, and you need to run it to run Photoshop and make that digital dress on top of someone, which will take some energy, but you need to have your computer running for a very long time to get to 10 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent. So that by itself, not involving any NFT, is potentially more sustainable than getting a real t-shirt. It makes sense. You're not getting the real product. You're having someone make a version that only exists in a digital image. So where does then the blockchain come in? Because that's when things start adding up. It's when people decide, like, you know what, I'm not just going to put these dresses on images. You know what, I'm going to sell the dress as a product the way I would sell a real product, and I'm going to do that as an NFT on top of, for example, the Ethereum blockchain. And then you still have that. You can still, obviously, NFTs are typically just references to images. So you put an image or reference on top of the blockchain, and then you sell that off to the highest bidder. Now, the carbon footprint, because it doesn't sound like there's a whole lot going on, but the thing is, as soon as you put something on top of a blockchain, you get part of the carbon footprint allocated based on your activity in the system. If you are taking part in this system, you are also responsible for part of the system. It's that simple. So you're also responsible for part of the total footprint that's being produced by the Ethereum blockchain if you're using that. So and the way we allocate these amounts is typically based on the share of the activity in the network. So if your NFT represents a certain share of the total activity in the network, then you get allocated a proportional amount of the total carbon footprint of that system. And that number gets big really fast because even just putting it on top of a blockchain can, result in a carbon footprint of more than 200 kilograms of carbon dioxide just for putting an NFT on top of a blockchain. And that activity will not end there. That's just putting it on there. That's when people will start maybe bidding on it. That's people will start, obviously, buying it, so it will be transferred and maybe selling it again sometime later. And each time something like that happens, it continues to add to the footprint of that dress, because we're still talking about the same thing. So that's why we previously, when we looked at an example digital dress, we found that there were a few transactions on it. Obviously, it had been minted first. There were a few transactions, and then the total footprint at the time was about 600 kilograms of carbon dioxide for a single digital dress. But that's also not the final number yet. So this is already much larger than the T-shirt we discussed. But it's not. It doesn't stop. The T-shirt. There is a final point somewhere down the line, but with the NFT, it can just continue to exist forever on the blockchain. So there is no real end to it either.
Okay, listen, now we are basically talking about fashion, so let's bring that in. Dolce & Gabbana, right, they are using Polygon. So, I mean, they are not the brand that is campaigning for climate change, because this, I think, is the real problem. When you have got fashion brand, they've been campaigning for climate change and, trying to do any kind of initiatives to fight, anything that harms the planet. And then they just jump on the bandwagon of NFT. That, for me, is the paradox of digital fashion. So coming back to Dolce & Gabbana, they never been kind of like a Stella McCartney, save the planet, use recycled material, but still. And they did quite a very successful NFT drop using Polygon. Polygon is a layer 2 that improves scalability of the Ethereum network in different kind of ways. And one way is obviously also maximize transaction, right? So using sidechain. So what is the impact that of using basically a layer 2 solution will have on the carbon footprint of an NFT?
Yes. Well, the thing is that if you are building layer 2 solutions, you avoid using the main platform for some extent. So you can't completely avoid interaction with the main layer, but you try to minimize it. You try to move it to that second layer, and by that, help effectively the main layer scale, because these solutions are really scaling solutions. The main Ethereum network gets congested really fast.
Yeah.
So if you're using Ethereum, you're probably more worried about transaction fees than the environmental footprint. You can sometimes pay hundreds of dollars in fees just just to use Ethereum. So to get around that congestion, people are trying to build new layers that will minimize the interaction with the main chain. You try to move activity from the main chain to that second layer, and then once it's on top of that second layer, you can essentially just make unlimited activities without having to worry about the issues that haunt the main layer, being the congestion, the high cost. These type of solutions tend to improve efficiency in the sense that they're still connected, but it means that you can have a lot more activity on the amount of activity you still need on the main chain. So the ratio is very high. You may only need a small bit of activity on the main chain to do a lot of additional activity on your second layer.
How does it translate in energy consumption?
Yeah, that's really hard to say, because the way you would have to calculate that is you would have to first of all assess the total activity that's going on in the second layers. That's always a bit difficult to measure, and then you would have to compare to how much activity is still needed on top of the main blockchain, because the way you would allocate the carbon footprint is that you would take your share of the main network and then distribute that over all the activity that's going on the second layer. So it really depends on the ratio. If the ratio is 1 to 60, then that NFT we just discussed of 600 kilograms of carbon, then we might be talking many NFTs on a second layer for the same amount of activity on the main layer. So then a single NFT can have a carbon footprint that is pretty equal to the T-shirt we discussed before.
Okay.
It improves the footprint of the activity, but the problem is in calculating that, and it's really hard to get the ratio out. So you can do it in the way I just explained, but it's not a very easy one to collect all the data.
Okay, fine. So last time we kind of closed the interview saying perhaps the solution is to use proof of stake. So now, do you maybe want to elaborate a bit on that? So how much saving we see using proof of stake,
yes.
And perhaps which proof of stake could be used, which are the candidates right now?
Yes, exactly. And I think it's important to make a distinction between second layer solutions, which really, primarily do scaling. They help the platform to scale, but they don't reduce the overall energy consumption. If you have a Polygon or any other second layer, it doesn't change the total energy consumption of the Ethereum network. It just means that you can fit in more activity within the same carbon footprint. If you talk about proof of stake, that's an actual energy consumption solution that aims to reduce the energy consumption and carbon footprint of the system as a whole. And well, we have some idea of what that would do for Ethereum. So let's say Ethereum today would move to proof of stake, then it could reduce its total energy consumption by 99.99%, because in proof of stake, you don't need those energy hungry machines that you need for proof of work based system. In fact, if you're running proof of stake, the only thing you need is a machine with an internet connection, and you're not competing with others in the network based on your hardware. So without that incentive, then the energy consumption just goes, well, it doesn't go to zero, but it's a whole lot less compared to a proof of work based system. And I should add that if you have second layer solutions, it still helps to improve the efficiency. So it really works together in making the system even more efficient. But only the proof of stake will really reduce the absolute amount of energy consumption in the system.
How do you feel about native NFT they kind of just launch on Cardano blockchain? Do you see that Cardano is well positioned to kind of develop this NFT marketplace in a better way than has been done in the past or until now?
Yes, we've been talking about Ethereum, I think, for now, because Ethereum is just the largest platform that supports NFTs, smart contracts. But obviously, there are already competitors like Cardano that have already implemented proof of stake, and that are also building, or people are also building NFT platforms on top of Cardano. So if you were to use those, then you can already issue your NFTs with a much smaller footprint than is possible on Ethereum. Now, the challenge is that obviously Ethereum is just much better positioned at the moment than Cardano is. It's a lot of these platforms have been built on top of Ethereum, and well, these NFT platforms for smaller cryptocurrencies are only just launching. So in that sense, they have a bit of a disadvantage. They're a bit behind on the Ethereum network. But the good news is that, like I said, it's not just the energy consumption that's high on Ethereum, but also the costs are very high on Ethereum. If you want to mint an NFT, it will cost you several hundreds of dollars. And that's also a lot cheaper on these competing platforms that are built on coins like Cardano. So that could be attracting more people to use these platforms instead of the ones that are on Ethereum. It's simply cheaper. But I
think what it is interesting is the fact, the concept of native NFT, which is not built with smart contract like is done on Ethereum. So it's kind of like a different way of coding.
Yes. Well, from an energy perspective, it doesn't really matter so much in what way you do your NFT. I'm really just looking at what's driving the chain behind the system. Is that proof of work? Is that proof of stake? And how you do your NFTs doesn't really, well, might matter a little bit, but the difference is obviously in that Cardano is running on a relatively clean algorithm, while Ethereum is not. So that's, I think, technically, yes, it's also interesting, but I think that's a completely different discussion.
Okay. Well, let's see what is going to happen as Ethereum is rolling out, its proof of stake, and as also Cardano develop more.
Yes.
NFT. Well, there is also Polkadot, which is doing some interesting stuff with NFT. So definitely an interesting space
it could absolutely help attract developers. If you're making things easier for developers, it could attract more business from Ethereum to these alternatives. So I think in that sense, it helps position them better compared to, well, obviously the big one in the room right now, Ethereum.
Listen, something just to close up that I wanted to see what you think, right? So going back to all this fashion brand, just jumping on NFT while we are doing that, all excited, everybody's making money, or perhaps they think they are going to make money. Why do you think they are doing these things without having done the proper due diligence on the aspect of energy consumption? Because from my side, I just think they don't have a clue what they are saying. I mean, they haven't done this due diligence. This is what I think. It's not something they have evaluated. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done it. Do you think that is like a fair consideration?
Yeah, so in my experience, a lot of people that, at least in the fashion industry, that are considering doing NFTs, they just hadn't thought about the energy consumption
Exactly.
aspect yet. And obviously there is a bit of a transparency issue. Hey, if you are using an NFT platform, it doesn't tell you, hey, this NFT has this carbon footprint. Are you sure? So,
They should hire people to do that. They
yeah,
should, if they are doing technology, this is something that I keep saying, right? Fashion has to evolve, but they have to do it if they start to understand technology and employ people. They do exactly that.
yes, yeah, especially from big brands, you would expect that this is something to be considered. Also, given that fashion has a massive carbon footprint globally, hey, it's responsible for a pretty big part of our total carbon footprint. I've seen some numbers say that fashion is responsible for up to 10% of our total carbon emissions, which isn't weird because everyone's wearing clothes. So it has to be a big number, and it means that the fashion industry has a big responsibility in this.
I agree on that. And there is then the point of waste, which is another big problem for fashion. I mean, for the physical element. Now with digital fashion, perhaps this issue is going to be solved because you don't have the cotton t-shirt that has to be recycled or has to be disposed of. Do you think in the digital world, if we are talking about digital item, is there like a waste of digital items that maybe after people enjoy them, they use them, they sold them, they resold them again, and then nobody wants them? Where do these digital wearables are going?
Well, the nice thing about a digital wearable is that it doesn't really end up outside of the digital space. So
but they still occupied space, right? Even if it's digital.
Yeah, I guess you could say that, but if there's no more activity on an NFT on top of the blockchain, it doesn't take any additional space, because the space is taken by the activity in an NFT. So
that's a good point to clarify.
yes, I think what you have to consider is that ultimately there is waste relating to these NFTs if you're using a blockchain, because in the real world, people are using obviously graphic cards to mine Ethereum with, and sometimes specialized graphic cards that can only mine cryptocurrency. And in that sense, you could say, well, if your NFT is part of this system, you're also partially responsible for the electronic waste that ultimately produced by the system. So in that sense, there is no waste or so much from the digital product itself, but there is a waste from again the blockchain that it's built on, which is, by the way, also solved by moving to proof of stake. It's all this proof of stake solves the same thing, but if you're on proof of work, then you should consider there is a bit of real world waste in the form of electronic waste as well down the line.
Alex, listen, thank you so much for coming on the show and clarify those points. I think they are an element that, for example, fashion brand, but anybody that is building NFT should consider bearing in mind, all the campaigning that now is done about minimizing carbon footprint and climate change issues. So it's something very important for anybody to consider.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, everyone should be taking their responsibility for that.
Okay, Alex, thank you so much for coming on the show and share your insight on something that is very important for anybody taking responsibility for our planet, which should be the top priority of any person and any business.
Absolutely. Very welcome.
Okay, so I will have you back on the show very soon so we can discuss more about what does it mean using technology and the impact on the environment.
Looking forward to it.